All right, what is going on, ladies and gentlemen? How is it going? I am Is There No One Else? And the video I'm bringing you today, I wanted to have a discussion. Wanted to go into some of the werewolf stuff that I did not cover in my previous video. Some people brought us some really good points, and I did not cover any of the video from that point of view, and I wanted to use that for this video. So before I do that, I wanted to provide a brief Cliff's Notes for those of you guys that did not watch it. But I went through the skills and abilities and the passives, and I talked about Werewolf in general. And I talked about how the heal on Werewolf is, the cost is really high, and how that heal cost should be reduced. I also talked about how the damage is in a good spot, in my opinion, because damage needed to come up across the board. Them having more damage isn't a big deal because they're not killing anything currently in Harrowstorm. I even went into an example of where I fought two werewolves for like 15 minutes in Harrowstorm, and they really couldn't kill me just because they didn't have enough damage to kill me. Now, before I dive into what I want to talk about, which is Werewolf as like a subclass, which was brought up on that video, I wanted to just talk about Werewolf in general. Werewolf has always been very tough to balance. It's always either been really, really strong or not strong at all, and completely unplayable. And that's the way it currently is in Harrowstorm, is completely unplayable. And we all evaluate balance and changes differently. Some people look at the current Werewolf and they see, the major minor defile tacked onto a dot, and they think that that's good or balanced because of the heal cost being too high. And I'm going to try and address those thoughts and why I disagree with those thoughts in this video, and I'm going to go pretty in depth. So if you guys are ready for some nerdy discussion, let's dive into it. First of all, we're going to discuss the heal. Okay, the heal costs 5,600 at base. It's a very expensive heal. It's 5,600 magicka, and as a stamina class, when you're running around as a werewolf, you typically have 10 to 15,000 magicka, and so you literally have 3 heals at your disposal. So when you're getting severely pressured as a werewolf, if you're playing solo, it's very, very tough to survive. Like, you more often than not have to come out of werewolf form in order to utilize it, and so because that cost is too much. It's too much to try and sustain, and you then really can't utilize that class from a 1vx perspective. That's part of the reason why I don't typically run Werewolf. The other reason why I don't run Werewolf is it has no forms of snare removal. And a lot of people are running in groups, are running some form of snare that slows me down and keeps me into a pile, and I can't land a sight, and I can't activate my abilities in a way. Like, any sort of root or snare is just going to completely screw me over as a werewolf. And it doesn't matter how powerful they are. If I get rooted in place, there's not a whole lot I can do from a solo perspective. And so when I play solo, I think we can all universally agree that Werewolf is just not very good. So when I look at these skills and abilities, I look at ways to make them useful in group play and small scale PvP. Now, Werewolf passively is designed to work better in a group. And so I want to talk about Werewolf from a solo small scale perspective and Werewolf in a group, because that's, where it gets its strengths. So, I would reduce the cost of the heal. And sorry, before we dive into that, my video also discussed looking at Werewolf as an ultimate. And so when you compare Werewolf as an ultimate to other ultimates that function similarly, it's very powerful in that it lasts for a long time. So if you provide ultimate level skills and abilities to Werewolf, it basically just makes for a very overperforming thing. And that's the thing that I think ZeniMax has had an issue with, is they've bounced from Werewolf being an ultimate, like what I was talked about in my video, to it being a subclass, like what everybody said on my video. They said that Werewolf is a subclass, it has its own unique passive skills and abilities, and it should be function more like a subclass instead of an ultimate, which is not what I covered in that video. And, I feel bad that I didn't provide that information and my point of view on that, but there's more than one way to adjust things. If you're looking at Werewolf as an ultimate, I think you need to look at the duration. If you're going to look at Werewolf as a subclass, as its own unique thing, you need to look at its skills, abilities, and passives as, and look at what we can do to either make them perform better in a certain environment or stop them from being severely oppressive to skills and abilities in the game. So that's what this video is for. If we're going to look at the heal, I think solo PvP, the heal will be better suited if it costs stamina or if the cost was just severely reduced. However, when you also look at it, one of the morphs that I showed gave you Major Berserk. When you overheal, you get Major Berserk for 6 seconds. Now, when you try to use that heal from a solo perspective, you're never really going to get Major Berserk, because when you activate your skill and ability, you need, like, you only have 3 heals at most at access to you. So when you get pressured, you want those heals to heal yourself. You don't want those heals to get a buff. So solo, you're probably never really going to see the Major Berserk. When you're running in a group, which is how Werewolf functions at its best with the pack leader passive, where you get 80% reduced cost on your transformation. If you run in a group with a dedicated healer and you run small group PvP with werewolves, you can utilize that magic dump to get Major Berserk more easily, because you're going to have healers healing you to full, and then you can use your own heal to buff your damage. And so that's going to make Werewolf very powerful in group play. And I'm not comparing it as like, oh, werewolves are going to be tough to 1vx. And that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to compare a 3-man werewolf group to like 2 stamina wardens and a stamina necromancer, or 3 stamina necromancers, or a magic, like some other form of group comp. Werewolf is going to be very, very competitive to all other group comps in the game, in my opinion, due to their tankiness and their access to all these major and minor debuffs in the game, as well as their access to an AoE CC, off balance, major fracture, major defile, minor defile, all these other sorts of things. So in a group play situation, werewolves are going to be very powerful. And one of their issues now, which is snare removal in Harrowstorm, is going away in Greymoor with the new Snow Treader boots. If you put on the Snow Treader boots as a werewolf, you're not going to get snared down and locked in place. You can just move freely, which is going to be fantastic. That is a very nice buff across all builds, but we need to take that into acknowledgement. One of the biggest weaknesses for werewolf will now no longer be a weakness. Yes, you have to build into it, but that's going to be a thing that's well worth building into as a werewolf. So what can we do for the heal to make it better in small-scale solo PvP while also giving it its own powerful effects in large-scale PvP? What I would say is I would get rid of the Major Berserk on the skill entirely. I would get rid of Major Berserk. I would have it be its heal. I would reduce the heal cost to like 2,000 or 3,000 magicka, because you should be able to heal. If it's a subclass, you should be able to heal. Like, that's ridiculous. So I would reduce the cost. In that way, I think you buff Werewolf. What I would also do is I would provide a passive to werewolves, and I would call it something like Cornered Prey, and I would give it the Cornered Prey passive, to where when you drop below X% health, you are now a cornered animal, and when you critically heal, you now get Major Berserk for 6 seconds. This now is a unique passive to the werewolf skill line that gives you access to Major Berserk, but it also plays into the wolf, like, terrifying beast, like, gameplay style. It's not just tacked onto something that can only be used well when you're in a group. This way, if it's attached this way in a passive, it works well for small scale PvP, and it works well in group play. Like, if all of a sudden as a group you're getting focused and you're getting hammered and you critically heal yourself, you now have access to Major Berserk. Now you don't get to use it any more effectively than a solo werewolf could. You guys both get access to the same Major Berserk passive, but it's now more universally viable. And if you reduce the heal, it is now more universally viable. And so that's what I would do to the heal. And this is looking at Werewolf as a subclass, like I said. If we're also looking at Werewolf as a subclass, and we're going to do an audit on its skills and abilities, I think tacking Major and Minor Defile onto one skill is a lot. Like, if you look at any other skill and class in the game, Major and Minor Defile is a lot of pressure. And so what I would do is I would either take off Major and Minor Defile. You guys can choose, you can choose which is more beneficial, but you can take one of those off. Like, let's say it's Minor Defile, right? You take Minor Defile off, and then you put a passive in the werewolf skill line that says whenever you deal disease damage, you increase your chance of providing the disease status effect by X%. So now it's another unique passive to werewolf that when you're dealing disease damage, you can then provide, you can get Minor Defile. You don't have to have it attached onto an expensive skill that gives you both. So that's what I would do if I was looking at improving the werewolf and making it a werewolf subclass. I would identify all these skills and abilities, and I would provide more unique passives to make it more playable. I would make it more playable not only as like a small group situation where I do think it's going to be very powerful, and I'll come up with some builds for it this patch now that I have snare removal at my, now that I have snare removal, I can actually run Werewolf, which I'm very excited about. But that's what I would look at. I'd look at ways to make a skill better in all formats instead of just really strong in one. And that's always been the issue in Werewolf. There's sometimes where you run across them and they're garbage, and they're garbage for one situation and one reason. But if you put them in a certain environment, they're very, very strong, and then all of a sudden people complain about them. This is what I try to do with all of my class. Like when I discuss classes, I got a discussion on Twitch a couple days ago about Magic Necromancer. And, I'm just providing this as an example, but we were talking about Magic and Necromancer, and I talked about the CC that Magic and Necromancer has, where it's very slow and it's cumbersome and it's tough to fight 1v1 with. And somebody made the comment, dude, Magic and Necromancer is overpowered with, harmony builds. Like, why do you want to give them another buff? And my point has always been, you can look at adjusting things individually to make them more competitive in certain environments, while also looking at what makes them strong in other environments and reducing that as well. So for a Necromancer, like I just said, you can look at ways to make their CCs a little bit better from a solo 1v1 perspective, while also just acknowledging that harmony is very strong, and you need to look at ways to adjust that maybe from a 1v1 perspective as well. Like you can buff one thing in a class and reduce another thing in another class and kind of balance out their skills and abilities without just stating like, it's fine as it is. They should have this overpowered stuff because they have this shitty stuff too. Why does anything have to be shitty on any class? Like, why? It shouldn't. Like, nothing should be shitty. It should be good, and it should be effective. And if all things were good and effective and unique, then the class is more fun and it's more playable and, all those other sorts of things. So I wanted to, apologize to the Wolf community because, like I said, I hope you understand that from where I'm coming from, if you're looking at it as an ultimate and you're going to give Werewolf all these major buffs, it can be very powerful and it can be very tough to deal with when you have that long duration. Because Werewolf, regardless of if it's been good or bad, regardless of how powerful it is with its killing power, it's always been tough to kill. Werewolf built properly is very tough to kill. And people will cite, oh, well, you take 20% increased damage because you're an animal. And it's like, well, you get 10,000 resistances and you get 10% damage mitigation as pack leader. And now you have access to minor main. Like, you have all these built-in forms of damage mitigation that offset these buffs. And so, and this is a problem not just with Werewolf, but with a lot of classes right now. Werewolf has now just jumped into it because it's a subclass. But there are some builds that are set up with X% of health that 1v1 you cannot burst. They know that they cannot be bursted, and so they build to that amount of health, and they just survive. And so, like I said, it's not just a Werewolf thing. It's a Warden thing. It's a Magic and Nightblade thing. Anybody with like these health-based abilities, very, very tough to deal with and very tough to burst. And burst is changing, and so that's why I, stop myself. Like, I'm not saying Werewolf is OP. I'm just looking at these specific things that are an issue. But Werewolf has always been one of those things that when I fight at 1v1, I cannot burst a well-played Werewolf. I can never burst a well-played Werewolf because they're so thick and they're so tanky that I just cannot get those combinations off. They're fast and they can get away from me because I'm slow, or their howl is very powerful and they heal themselves up to full very quickly, and they're also tanky on top of it. So there's a point I'm going to with this. Werewolf has always been that sort of tanky thing. And so if you're going to treat it as an ultimate, which I'm not saying you need to, this is just another thing piggybacking off my video. But if you're going to treat it as an ultimate, the counter to dealing with a Werewolf has always been like, okay, well, I can't kill it. I just need to wait for Werewolf to go down so that I can kill it. That whether it's been good or bad, it's always been tough to kill 1v1. If you're going to give Werewolf ultimate level capabilities and you're going to give it a 10-minute plus duration, there's no window to kill a Werewolf. That's the point I was trying to make. That's why I had an issue with the duration being potentially where it's at, because it's very tough to kill werewolves when they're in werewolf form. And so I think you can look at it two different ways, and that's what this video is for. I think you can look at it from an ultimate form, and that I discussed in that video, and you can look to reduce the duration. If you want to treat it as a subclass, you keep the duration and you look to add more passives, skills, and abilities passively into their skill line, while also that make them unique and powerful, and then you take off some of the major and minor buffs that they have tacked onto every skill that they have on their skill line. This way, it still stays powerful. It becomes more unique, and it's not just, just tacking a major buff onto every skill. Like, oh, when I fear you, I now get, major maim or minor maim. Now when I overheal, I get major berserk. Now I have major brutality. Now I have increased crit chance. Now when I apply this dot, I have major and minor defile. Like, it'd be cool if they had more passives. If you're going to treat it as a subclass, give it more passives, give it more unique abilities, and then we don't need to have all these abilities tacked on and have these very strong things. And then Werewolf at that point would be more viable from a solo perspective and a group play perspective. Those are my thoughts. So I know I'm going to get more feedback for this, and I welcome it. I'm more than willing to admit when I'm wrong. And obviously I was wrong, and how I was looking at Werewolf isn't how other people were looking at it, and wanted to provide those clarifications, because I'm not gonna run away from something that I'm wrong on. When I'm wrong, and I call it out, and I want to get good information out there. And these are my initial thoughts. If you guys have anything you want to say about this, or anything that I brought up in here and where I could be wrong, I'm happy to hear them. Yeah. Thank you for watching, guys. Thank you for always being constructive. I really appreciate it. My community and people that respond to my videos are fantastic. I can't tell you how awesome it is that I can have these conversations with you guys, and I'm not called a fucking retard, even when I am being one. I think it's awesome that I can have these conversations and people are like, hey, I disagree with you here, I disagree with you here. When I go to other videos where other YouTubers try to do videos like this, they don't get to do the same things that I do. They don't get to have these same discussions that I do. So I just want to say that I'm not taking it for granted. I really appreciate it, and I like to get this information because I like to be an open book. So thank you for that. Whether I'm right or wrong, call myself out for being a dummy anytime you guys want me to be. But yeah, hopefully I explained my point of view well. Hopefully I explained it a little bit better. Thank you for watching, guys. Have a nice day.